Robert Hamilton owned half the commercial real estate in Chicago. At 62 years old, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He had everything except the one thing he wanted most: to know if anyone would care about him without his wealth. For 3 months, Robert had been planning something unusual. He would leave his penthouse, his tailored suits, and his reputation behind. He would become invisible, just another face in the crowd. He wanted to see how ordinary people truly lived, and more importantly, how they treated someone who had nothing. On a cold November morning, Robert looked at himself in the mirror one last time. His personal assistant had helped him transform completely. His silver hair was hidden under a worn baseball cap. His expensive watch was replaced with a cheap plastic one from a drugstore. He wore threadbare jeans, a faded jacket with a tear in the sleeve, and boots that had seen better days. He looked like a man down on his luck, someone the world had forgotten. Robert chose Millbrook, a small town in rural Illinois, 3 hours from Chicago. Nobody there would recognize him. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where the diner stayed open late, and where people still believed in helping one another. Or so he hoped. He arrived on a Greyhound bus, carrying only a small backpack with a few changes of clothes. The November wind cut through his thin jacket as he walked down Main Street. The town was smaller than he expected. There was a grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner called Martha's Kitchen, and not much else. The sidewalks were cracked, and many of the storefronts looked tired and worn. Robert had rented a room at the Millbrook Motor Lodge, a rundown motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and cleaning solution. The heater rattled and barely worked. For the first time in decades, Robert felt what it was like to be cold and uncomfortable with no easy solution. The next morning, he walked into Martha's Kitchen. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and bacon. A few locals sat at the counter, talking quietly. Robert slid into a booth near the window and picked up a laminated menu. A waitress approached his table. She was about 40, with tired eyes but a genuine smile. Her name tag read Sarah. She wore the standard diner uniform and moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this job for years. "What can I get you, hun?" Sarah asked, pulling out her order pad. "Just coffee and toast, please," Robert said quietly. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. She looked at him more carefully, taking in his worn clothes and the weariness in his face. "You sure that's all?" "The breakfast special is pretty good. Eggs, bacon, hash browns." "Just the toast is fine," Robert said. "I'm watching my budget." Sarah nodded with understanding, not pity. "I'll bring you extra butter," she said softly before walking away. Robert watched her go, noticing how she moved through the diner with practiced ease. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, remembered how customers liked their eggs, and had a kind word for everyone. But he also noticed something else. Several customers barely acknowledged her. One man snapped his fingers to get her attention. Another complained loudly that his eggs were too runny, though they looked perfectly fine. When Sarah brought Robert's order, she set down not just toast, but also a small bowl of fruit. "On the house," she said quietly. "You look like you could use it." Robert was surprised. "I can't accept this," he started to say. "It's just some fruit we had left over," Sarah said with a slight smile. "It'll just go to waste otherwise. Besides, everybody needs a little kindness now and then." Before Robert could respond, a harsh voice cut through the diner. "Sarah! Table 5 needs more coffee, and they needed it 5 minutes ago." A heavy-set man in a stained apron stood behind the counter, glaring at Sarah. This was clearly her boss. "Yes, Mr. Peterson," Sarah said calmly, though Robert saw her shoulders tense slightly. She gave Robert a quick smile before hurrying to table 5 with the coffee pot. Robert ate his simple breakfast slowly, watching the dynamics of the diner unfold. He saw how Mr. Peterson criticized Sarah constantly, how some customers treated her like she was invisible, and how she handled it all with grace and dignity. When Robert went to pay, Sarah rang him up at the register. The bill was $3.50. Robert pulled out exact change from his pocket, money that felt strange in his hands because it was so little. "Thank you," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "You take care," Sarah replied. Then she added quietly, "If you're looking for work, the hardware store down the street sometimes needs help." As Robert walked out into the cold November air, he felt something unexpected. For the first time in years, someone had shown him kindness without wanting anything in return. Sarah had no idea who he really was, and that made her gesture even more meaningful. Robert decided to stay in Millbrook longer than he had originally planned. He wanted to understand this town, and especially this woman who had shown compassion to a stranger she thought had nothing. Part 2. The Daughter. Robert spent the next few days exploring Millbrook and observing its rhythms. He returned to Martha's kitchen each morning, always ordering modestly, always leaving what little tip he could afford on his assumed budget. Sarah was there every morning, working the early shift before the lunch rush. She always greeted him with the same warm smile, never treating him differently than any other customer. On his fourth day in town, Robert arrived at the diner earlier than usual. Sarah was setting up for the morning, filling salt and pepper shakers and wiping down tables. She looked more tired than usual, and he noticed dark circles under her eyes. "Morning," Robert said as he took his usual booth. "Good morning," Sarah replied, bringing over a pot of coffee without him having to ask. "You're here early today?" "Couldn't sleep," Robert said, which was partly true. The motel's thin walls and rattling heater made rest difficult. "How about you? You look tired." Sarah poured his coffee and managed a small smile. "My daughter Emma had a rough night. She's 11 and has been fighting a bad cold. I was up with her most of the night." "Is she feeling better?" Robert asked. "A little. My neighbor Mrs. Chen is watching her today since she couldn't go to school." Sarah pulled out her order pad. "What can I get you?" Before Robert could answer, Mr. Peterson's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Sarah, stop chatting and start working. We got customers coming in." The diner was nearly empty except for one elderly man at the counter reading a newspaper. "Sorry," Sarah said quietly to Robert before hurrying away. Robert ordered his usual toast and coffee. As the morning progressed, he watched Sarah work without a break, never sitting down, always moving. Around 10 o'clock, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She glanced at it quickly, and her face went pale. Sarah rushed to the back, and Robert could hear her talking urgently to Mr. Peterson. Her voice was strained with worry. A moment later, she emerged, her hands shaking as she untied her apron. "Is everything okay?" Robert asked as she passed his booth. Sarah stopped, tears welling in her eyes. "It's my daughter. The neighbor just called. Emma's fever spiked really high. I need to take her to the emergency room, but Mr. Peterson won't let me leave. We're short-staffed, and he says if I go, I'm fired." Robert felt anger rise in his chest. "Your daughter needs you. That's more important than this job." "You don't understand," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I'm a single mom. This job is all I have. The tips, the paycheck, it's how we survive. Without it, I can't pay rent, can't buy food. But Emma," she wiped her eyes roughly, "Emma is everything to me." Robert watched as Sarah made the only choice a mother could make. She walked to the back, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. Mr. Peterson followed her, yelling about responsibility and how she was letting the team down. Sarah didn't respond. She just kept walking. "You're fired!" Mr. Peterson shouted after her. "Don't bother coming back!" Sarah's shoulders shook, but she didn't stop. She pushed through the door and was gone. Robert sat in stunned silence. The other customers seemed unfazed, already going back to their coffee and conversations. Mr. Peterson grumbled his way back to the kitchen, complaining about unreliable employees. Robert left money on the table and walked out. He had to know if Sarah and her daughter were okay. He walked to the town's small medical center. a modest building that served as both a clinic and emergency room. His instincts told him this was where Sarah would have taken Emma. He waited outside for nearly 2 hours, sitting on a cold bench near the entrance. He told himself he was being foolish, that this wasn't his business. But something about Sarah's quiet dignity and fierce love for her daughter had touched something deep inside him. Finally, Sarah emerged with a small girl bundled in a thick coat. Emma had dark hair like her mother and pale skin that suggested she'd been quite sick. Sarah's face showed relief mixed with worry. She was probably thinking about the job she'd just lost and the bills she couldn't pay. Robert stood up and approached them carefully. "How is she?" he asked. Sarah looked surprised to see him. "She's okay. The fever broke. They said it was just a bad flu, but they wanted to make sure." She held Emma closer. "Thank you for asking." Emma looked up at Robert with curious eyes. Despite being sick, she managed a small smile. "I'm glad she's all right," Robert said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $20, most of what he'd allowed himself to carry. "Please, take this. For medicine or whatever you need." "I can't," Sarah started to protest. "Please," Robert insisted, pressing the money into her hand. "You helped me when I needed it. Let me return the favor." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. This is so kind, but I just lost my job. $20 won't fix that. I don't know how I'm going to feed Emma, pay rent, keep the lights on." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what I'm going to do." Emma looked up at her mother, sensing her distress. "It's okay, Mama. We'll be okay." Sarah hugged her daughter close, trying to be brave. Robert felt his carefully constructed disguise become almost unbearable. He wanted to tell Sarah who he really was, to write her a check that would solve all her problems. But something held him back. He needed to understand this situation more deeply. He needed to see what happened next. "Where do you live?" Robert asked. "Let me at least walk you home. It's cold." Sarah hesitated, but then nodded. "We're just a few blocks away." They walked together through Millbrook's quiet streets, Emma between them, holding both their hands. Sarah lived in a small duplex on the edge of town. The paint was peeling, and the steps creaked, but someone had tried to make it homey with a wreath on the door and curtains in the windows. "This is us," Sarah said. "Thank you for walking with us." "Mama, can he come in for hot chocolate?" Emma asked suddenly. "He looks cold." Sarah looked embarrassed. "Emma, honey, I'm sure he has things to do." "Actually, hot chocolate sounds wonderful," Robert heard himself say. They went inside. The duplex was small but clean and warm. There were drawings on the refrigerator, books stacked neatly on a shelf, and photos of Emma at various ages. Everything spoke of a mother doing her best with very little. Sarah made hot chocolate while Emma settled on the couch with a blanket. Robert sat in a worn armchair and looked around. He saw bills stacked on a small desk marked with red, past due stamps. He saw a calendar on the wall with careful notations of Sarah's work schedule, now rendered meaningless. "Here you go," Sarah said, handing him a mug. She sat down with her own cup, looking exhausted and defeated. "What will you do?" Robert asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I'll figure something out. I always do. Maybe the grocery store is hiring, or I can clean houses. I won't let Emma go without, whatever it takes." Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her small body finally relaxed after the stress of being sick. "She's lucky to have you," Robert said. "I'm the lucky one," Sarah replied, looking at her daughter with such love it made Robert's chest ache. "She's my whole world." Robert finished his hot chocolate and stood to leave. "Thank you for letting me in," he said. "I hope things get better for you both." "Thank you for caring," Sarah said. "Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people wouldn't have asked." As Robert walked back to his motel through the darkening evening, he made a decision. He was going to do more than just observe. He was going to help. But he would do it carefully, in a way that preserved Sarah's dignity and taught him what he needed to learn about real kindness. The next morning, Robert didn't go to Martha's kitchen. Instead, he walked into the Millbrook Community Church, a modest white building with a tall steeple that could be seen from anywhere in town. A sign outside advertised Sunday services and a community food bank. Inside, a woman in her 60s was arranging canned goods on shelves. She looked up with a welcoming smile. Her name tag read, Pastor Jean. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Robert replied. "I'm new in town, and I'm looking for ways to help out. Volunteer work, maybe." Pastor Jean's smile widened. "We can always use help. Are you looking for anything specific?" "I heard that one of the waitresses at Martha's kitchen lost her job yesterday. Sarah something? She has a daughter. I thought maybe the church could help them somehow." Pastor Jean's expression shifted to concern. "Sarah Mitchell? Yes, I heard about that. Tom Peterson can be a difficult man. Sarah's been coming to our food bank for the past few months. She's proud, though. She only takes what she absolutely needs and always tries to volunteer in return." "What does the town think of her?" Robert asked. "Those of us who know her think she's wonderful. She works hard, raises her daughter right, and never complains. But you know how small towns can be. Some people judge her for being a single mother, for struggling financially. They don't see the whole person, just the circumstances." Pastor Jean paused, studying Robert more carefully. "Why are you asking about Sarah specifically?" "I've seen how kind she is," Robert said simply. "She helped me when she had no reason to. I'd like to return the favor." Pastor Jean nodded with understanding. "The best way to help Sarah is to help her find work. She needs employment, not charity. She's got her pride, and that's not a bad thing. It's what keeps her going." Robert thought about this. What if someone wanted to hire her? What skills does she have? She's an excellent waitress, obviously. But she's also good with numbers, helped her late husband with his bookkeeping before he passed. She's organized, reliable, and honest. Any business would be lucky to have her. "How long has she been alone?" Robert asked. 3 years now. Her husband Michael died in a car accident. He was a good man, a mechanic. After he died, Sarah was left with medical bills, funeral costs, and a child to raise alone. She's been fighting to keep her head above water ever since. Robert felt the weight of Sarah's story settle over him. This wasn't just about a single act of kindness. This was about a woman who had been dealt blow after blow and kept standing, kept fighting for her daughter. "Thank you for telling me," Robert said. "I'll think about how I can help." He left the church and walked through Millbrook with new eyes. He stopped at the hardware store, the grocery store, and several other businesses, asking carefully worded questions about employment and the community. What he discovered troubled him. Millbrook was dying slowly. Young people left for bigger cities and better opportunities. Businesses struggled to stay open. The town had once thrived when a manufacturing plant operated on its outskirts, but that had closed 15 years ago. Now, Millbrook survived on stubbornness and the determination of people who refused to abandon their home. That evening, Robert sat in his motel room with his cheap prepaid phone. He wanted to call his assistant, to set plans in motion that would fix Sarah's problems immediately. But he resisted. He needed to understand more. He needed to see how this community functioned, how people like Sarah survived when the world seemed determined to grind them down. The next day, Robert went to the Millbrook Public Library, a small brick building that smelled like old books and floor polish. He used one of the public computers to research the town's history and current economic situation. What he found confirmed his observations. Millbrook needed help, not just Sarah. As he was leaving the library, he literally bumped into Emma. She was carrying a stack of books nearly as tall as she was. "Oh, sorry," Emma said, dropping 2 books. Robert bent to pick them up. "It's my fault," Robert said. "That's a lot of books." "I like to read," Emma explained. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, lets me check out as many as I want because Mama can't afford to buy them. Robert glanced at the titles. They were advanced for an 11-year-old, books about science, history, and mathematics. You must be pretty smart, Robert observed. Emma blushed. I want to be a doctor someday, like the ones who helped me when I was sick. But Mama says college costs a lot of money. She looked sad for a moment. She worries I'll be disappointed. I don't think you'll be disappointed, Robert said gently. You seem like someone who figures out how to get what she wants. Emma smiled, and Robert could see her mother's strength in that smile. Mama says the same thing. She says if I work hard enough, anything is possible. Your mother is right, Robert said. Never forget that. Emma gathered her books. I should go. Mama's waiting. She's been applying for jobs all day. She's tired, but she doesn't want me to worry. Robert watched Emma leave, her small figure somehow carrying both books and hope with equal determination. That evening, Robert made a decision. He called his assistant on his personal phone, the first time he'd used it since arriving in Millbrook. Robert? Thank God. I was getting worried, his assistant Marcus said. I'm fine, but I need you to do something for me, and I need you to be discreet. Of course. What do you need? Robert outlined his plan carefully. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons Robert valued him so highly. That's quite generous, Marcus said when Robert finished. Are you sure about this approach? I'm sure. I want to help this town, but I want to do it right. I want to understand what real need looks like, what real kindness means. And I want to see if there are others here like Sarah, people who deserve a chance. I'll get started immediately, Marcus said. When are you coming back to Chicago? Not yet, Robert replied. I'm not finished here. Over the next few days, Robert became a more active part of Millbrook. He volunteered at the community food bank, helping Pastor Jean sort donations and pack boxes for families in need. He noticed that Sarah came in once, looking embarrassed, and took only the bare minimum: rice, beans, canned vegetables. She tried to pay with volunteer hours, insisting on cleaning the church basement in exchange. Robert also spent time at the Millbrook Diner, a smaller establishment across from Martha's kitchen. The owner, an older woman named Grace, treated her employees with respect. Robert noticed that her business struggled, but her values never wavered. Why don't more people come here? Robert asked Grace one afternoon. Tom Peterson over at Martha's Kitchen undercuts my prices, Grace explained. He pays his workers minimum wage and treats them poorly, so his costs are lower. He can afford to charge less. I pay my people fairly, treat them like family, and I'm barely keeping the doors open. She smiled sadly. But I won't compromise. Some things matter more than profit. Robert felt something click into place. He saw now what was missing in his own life. He had spent decades focused on profit margins and efficiency. He had forgotten about the human cost of those decisions, forgotten about people like Sarah and Grace, who were trying to do right in a world that often punished them for it. What if someone invested in your business? Robert asked carefully. Someone who believed in what you're doing. Grace laughed, not unkindly. Investors want returns. They want me to cut costs, which means cutting staff or wages. They want me to compete with Tom Peterson by becoming like him. I won't do that. What if an investor didn't want you to change anything? What if they just wanted to help? Grace studied Robert with shrewd eyes. That's a nice thought, but those investors don't exist. Everyone wants something. Robert didn't argue, but he filed the conversation away, adding Grace's diner to the plans forming in his mind. That night, Robert sat in his motel room and realized something profound. He had come to Millbrook expecting to find people trying to take advantage of him. Instead, he had found people like Sarah, Emma, Pastor Jean, and Grace, people who gave even when they had little, who maintained their integrity even when it cost them, who believed in doing right even when the world didn't reward them for it. For the first time in years, Robert Hamilton felt truly humbled, and for the first time in years, He understood what his wealth could really mean if he used it with wisdom and purpose. Part 4. The truth emerges. On his 10th day in Millbrook, Robert's carefully constructed world began to crack. He was having breakfast at Grace's diner when Marcus called his prepaid phone, something they had agreed would only happen in an emergency. "We have a situation," Marcus said without preamble. "A reporter has been asking questions. They know you're in Millbrook." Robert felt his stomach drop. "How?" "Your driver mentioned to someone that you were doing research in small-town Illinois." The reporter started digging. "They haven't published anything yet, but they will. You probably have a day, maybe two, before this becomes public knowledge." Robert closed his eyes. He had been so careful, but he had forgotten that in the modern world, true anonymity was nearly impossible, especially for someone with his profile. "Thank you for the warning," Robert said. "Continue with the plans we discussed. I'll handle things here." He ended the call and sat staring at his coffee. He needed to tell Sarah the truth before she heard it from someone else. She deserved that much. Robert found Sarah at the Millbrook Community Center, where she was helping set up for a children's reading program. Emma was there too, arranging picture books on small tables. They both looked up when he entered. "Robert!" Emma called out, waving enthusiastically. "Are you here to help?" "Actually, I need to talk to your mother," Robert said. "It's important." Sarah's smile faded slightly. She must have heard something serious in his tone. "Emma, honey, can you finish setting up? I'll be right back." They stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. Sarah wrapped her sweater tighter around herself and waited for Robert to speak. "I haven't been honest with you," Robert began. "My name isn't just Robert. It's Robert Hamilton." Sarah looked confused. "Okay. I'm not sure if you've heard of me. I own Hamilton Properties. We own commercial real estate across the country. He paused, hating how this sounded. "I'm a billionaire." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. "Is this a joke?" "I wish it were," Robert said. "I came to Millbrook pretending to.